In today's video, we're going to be discussing whether or not you should be buying used gear. Welcome back to another video. My name is Luis Garcia, and today we're going to be talking buying used gear. Now, what's the first thing you think of when you hear used gear? Most likely you're going to think of something that's broken, something that's cheap, something that's not worth it, or something that is just not going to work the way it's supposed to. That's not always the case. Now, when it comes to film equipment, it can get very, very costly. We don't have money to spend every time a new camera comes out with the specs that we want, and some people don't even have a camera to even start recording with, and they're using their phones. But let's just say that you do want to get a new camera. Are you going to shell out $1,000, $2,000 to buy the new Blackmagic cinema camera? No. Especially if you've never actually used a camera before, if you've never even tested out a camera before. So what should you do? What if you don't want to spend money on renting gear every time that you want to make a YouTube video or every time you have a music video shoot? What if you want something that you can actually utilize on the day-to-day? That's where used gear comes in. Now, there's nothing wrong with buying used gear. Now, buying used gear doesn't have to be a scary process. You may actually be able to find some used gear on Craigslist. You may be able to find some used gear on Facebook Marketplace, or you could just do an internet search to see if there's any used gear, any stores that are selling used gear. Now, film equipment can become very expensive, especially cameras. Now, there seems to be a new camera being released every couple of months, and us as creators, we do get tempted with the specs we always want. We always think that new cameras equals better content. That's not always the case. The basic principles and fundamentals of filmmaking is what's always going to make your video stand out. But what if we just want a camera to practice with, a camera that we want to actually help us create more content? There's absolutely nothing wrong with browsing used listings for this gear. Now, the first camera that I ever purchased actually was on Craigslist. I got a DSLR for about $300 and it came with 3 lenses. So that's not a bad deal at all. The person just wanted to get rid of the camera. Now, I tested the camera, made sure I had a memory card, I made sure that it's working properly, I made sure that there was nothing wrong with it as far as it comes to video and photos, and I purchased it and it actually did me well. It served me well for a bunch of my first videos. I was able to make some money out of it. I actually did use it for some events and some music videos. So it was actually a solid investment, a solid purchase that I only spent $300 on, and I ended up getting 3 lenses. It also came with a bag and a couple other little extra accessories, some extra batteries, and I was happy with it. Now, what happened after putting it through its paces, it did end up overheating. So that's something that you do have to consider. Now, buying used gear means that they've already taken a beating, and if you're gonna utilize it on a day-to-day fashion, you may end up in the same situation that I was, which was I had a camera, but every time I went to go shoot a video, it started to overheat. So then I started actually looking for, saving up for a new camera. But what did I do? I ended up buying another used camera for my second camera, and it wasn't bad. I'm still using it now. Now, the benefits of buying used is that you're not going to come out of pocket thousands of dollars like you would for a new camera. 1080p is still usable. You don't need 4K, you don't need 6K, you don't need 8K. Now, if you are running a video production company, that's a different story. If you plan on doing client work, then that's a different story. I understand why you may think you need that, and you actually should invest in that if you have the money for it. But if you are just starting out, if you are just making YouTube videos or just online content, buying used gear is still going to get you where you need to go. You just have to make sure that you actually do your research. Make sure that what you're paying for is actually what this camera is worth at this time. Make sure that you look at the seller, find out what this person's rating is. Now, if you're on Facebook, if you're on eBay, usually you could see a little bit of the person's history when it comes to buying and selling. Make sure that you're meeting these strangers in a public place, in a well-lit place. Try to schedule these meetups during the day or early afternoon. Try not to do anything at night because that could be a little sketchy. Now, are you going to run a risk? Of course you're going to run a risk of buying used gear. Just make sure that you test it before you actually buy it. Make sure that you put a memory card in the camera. Make sure that you inspect the camera. Make sure it turns on. Make sure that it doesn't freeze. Make sure it doesn't overheat while you're actually testing it. Keep in mind that if you're buying used gear from a rental house, it is a rental house, which means that people have used it. It has been banged up. It's been around the block. But that shouldn't stop you from getting it, especially if that's what you can afford right now. If you can afford a $1,000 camera, $2,000 camera, then you might as well buy a brand new one. But if you really can't and you only want to be able to spend a couple of $100 on something to get you started, then used gear is actually where it's at. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't be embarrassed. Don't be ashamed of that. Don't worry about who is using the latest technology. And it doesn't matter what tool you're using, whether it's a cell phone, whether it's a DSLR, whether it's a cinema camera. If you don't know the basic principles and fundamentals of filmmaking, your content is still going to be garbage. So it doesn't matter if you only spend $300 on your camera. Use that $300 camera to up your skills and get you focused and get you motivated and get you hyped up to actually create content. Now, the more that you create, the better that you're going to be. And then eventually, you're going to be able to afford that $2,000 or $3,000 camera investment. The key thing is just to get something to get started. Again, if you are looking to make a career out of this, you will eventually going to have to shell out the big bucks for some of those cameras, but work your way up to it. There's no need to stop yourself from creating now just because you don't have that $5,000 camera. And avoid anything that makes you feel sketchy. If you feel any kind of red flags whatsoever, don't go through with it. Just follow your gut instinct. Remember that the best tool, the best camera that you have is whatever is available, whatever is in your actual hands at the moment. Practice, don't give up, and make sure that you don't feel embarrassed if you're buying used gear. From cameras to lights to lenses, buying used, there's nothing wrong with it. As long as the equipment works, it's well worth the price. Until next time, remember to consume less and create more.